Welcome back to logisticsales.com and episode 33 of Mastering the Phone Sales series. I'm your host, Damon Grewal, and today my co-host is Gail Neuenhausen.
Hi everyone, great to be here.
Today we're covering one of the biggest difference makers in sales, the follow-up. And most people will tell you the money is in the follow-up. But most sales aren't lost because of price. They're not lost because of competition. Most sales are lost because there was no structured follow-up in the process. So in this episode, we're actually going to break it down. We're going to tell you about why the follow-up is where most of the deals are won. We're going to teach you about the psychology behind consistent follow-ups, how often you should follow up, what to say during follow-ups, and lastly, how to stay persistent without being too pushy to push that salesperson or that customer away versus how to reel them in with doing proper follow-ups. So Gail, do you want to start with the big question? Why follow-ups can win the deals?
Exactly. And like you said, follow-ups, they really are the make or break it when it comes to sales, because that's where the conversation continues. Without a follow-up, the conversations don't continue and you aren't going to land a sale. So let's talk about why follow-ups are going to win you deals. Now, the reality is that when it comes to prospects, they don't really say no. Instead, they say not right now. So if you aren't following up, you're going to miss them because people get busy, priorities are going to shift, and emails will end up getting buried, especially if you're not following up, because 10 days from now, it'll be at the bottom of the inbox. 15 days from now, it'll be gone.
And this is something that we try to emphasize to a lot of our sales reps is a lot of people aren't ready to buy maybe right now. And maybe they're looking to buy at a future date. And again, if it's, for example, I always like to use the cell phone, but if it's not broke, we don't really need a replacement. But the thing is staying top of mind is saying, okay, when there is a need for the product that I'm selling or the service that I'm selling, I want to be the first call and I want to be top of mind. And I want to show somebody that, hey, if you have to make a decision, you want to talk to the person that's actively engaged with you and making you reassured that we're going to be able to deliver that product and service. Again, with, by showing you the consistency that I have by doing these follow-ups and by showing you that actually I want that business and I'm hungry for it.
Yeah, and doing follow-ups is one of the easiest ways to keep you top of mind because it shows that you have that professionalism. It shows that you have a commitment to continue to reach out and build those conversations and build that relationship. And it's honestly a big confidence booster because people look at somebody doing a follow-up and it's like, wow, good for them. They were able to follow up with me. They check back in with me. They want to know where I'm at in my decision-making process, because a lot of sales reps don't. They don't follow it up because they don't have the confidence in how that second conversation is going to go. And finally, it's just reliability. If you are doing that follow-up, that prospect's going to see that and go, okay, this person responds to their emails. They're on top of who they're going to be following up with. So I know that if I give them my business, there's a good chance that they're going to be a reliable service provider.
Yeah, and that's anytime that we're giving $1 for anything. Anytime we're going to give somebody money, we want to make sure that they value that. Those are hard-earned dollars that the person is earning and that they're transferring over to you in that exchange of business. And just knowing that, hey, if you're going to value that same dollar that I valued it or how I earned it, that's the type of relationship I want to build, to know that, hey, the other person sees the same value in it, and that if we both value the same thing, that's just, again, building that relationship and that trust and accountability and everything that you just kind of mentioned here. It creates that confidence, it creates that reliability, and it helps make that transaction just a little bit easier.
And majority of sales, they're not happening on the first touch. They're happening after multiple conversations. And you're only going to get to that point of having multiple conversations if you're doing the proactive follow-ups, because 9 times out of 10, a customer's not going to call you to be sold to. You have to call them to sell to them. So when you follow up consistently, you're going to separate yourself from the reps who just give up too early. Now, Damon, if you could talk to us a little bit about mindset, because I had you talk about it in a couple episodes ago, and I'd like to hear your take when it comes to the follow-up.
For sure. And we talk about this over and over again. When it comes to mindset, you have to be in the right frame of mind to understand how important that follow-up is to your sales process and to closing that deal. And like you mentioned, Gail, it's about knowing ahead of time that I'm going to need to follow up at some point. to be able to carry this conversation forward. And the biggest mistake that sales reps make is that they're afraid of doing so many follow-ups with that client, but they don't understand like the importance of it. And so I know it could sometimes be borderline annoying, but then there's also the difference between like being annoying and being professional. And the follow-up is not pressure. Follow-up is service. And we always talk about that. Be in service when you're talking to a client. And then you're going to feel good about that aspect as well. And you're not going to feel like, oh, I'm being that annoying, pestering person. And if your solution can genuinely help the prospect, then following up is a responsibility that you need to have. So it's shifting that mindset to say, hey, I'm not chasing, I'm actually guiding. And you're reminding and you're creating clarity for that person to let them know what that product and service is really about so that they can be more confident when they're making that purchase. Confidence in the follow-up actually comes from your belief in your values. Gail, should we talk about timing and how important that structure matters when it comes to the sales process or doing follow-ups?
Yeah, exactly. Now, every follow-up cycle for different sales strategies are going to be a little bit different depending on the product and the service that you're selling. But the important part is that they're structured, they're not random. You have to have a system and you have to have a framework in mind when it comes to doing your sales and your follow-up schedule. Okay. Now, a standard one, again, adapt it based off of your business and what's going to align with what you're doing for sales. But typically a follow-up within the first 24 to 48 hours after that initial call to have a quick check-in to make sure that they've received anything that you sent over to them and just have that reconnection. Hey, did you get anything? Do you have any questions? Is there anything I can help you with? Okay, great. Awesome. Moving on. Then again, you're going to have a follow-up at that 3 to 5 business day point. And that's that conversation. That's normally your second conversation. It's where you're digging into the questions that were asked in the first conversation. You're following up to see if there's anything that's come up for them after reviewing all of the information that you sent them or that they've gone over. It's starting to weed through the Q&A, the gray areas that are starting to arise.
And something that I like to put into those is, and we teach the sales reps this too, is you don't want to put too much in one follow-up. Usually typically leave it to one main point that you're trying to make, and then leave the other ones, again, in that 3 to 5 follow-ups that we're doing. Break it down into small chunks. So you're not overwhelming the prospect with too much information at once, but just small digestible pieces. And that's a great way to do those follow-ups. And that's kind of, I think, what you were referring to is we're kind of breaking it down, but we're also trying to show those value statements and just, again, letting somebody get reassured that they're using the right person or they're buying from the right person.
Yeah, exactly. And so after that 3 to 5 day first initial follow-up, then you just want to start slotting it in almost as like a weekly follow-up. So maybe you call them every Tuesday at 7:30 in the morning and check in and see how they're going and where they are in their decision-making process and their buying process. But like Damon said, it's every follow-up. You don't want to go into it with just a, hey, how you doing? Just checking in. You need to drop value. Every time you're talking to them, there has to be something of substance in that conversation, some sort of valuable tidbit, some information, some question that gets answered, but something that has them walking away feeling like they've received something from that conversation, from that communication.
And to keep moving that conversation forward. Like that's the goal of the follow-up is how do we keep this conversation going until we can close them? And sometimes we're just trying to draw out something from the prospect as well in those follow-ups to say, okay, will they bite on something? Will something, can I hit on a point that's important to them? And sometimes, again, breaking up these follow-ups can help you do that.
Yeah. And honestly, every situation is going to be different. So when it comes to the next follow-up before ending the current conversation is making sure you scheduled that. On that initial call, say, hey, Damon, I'm going to call you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Is that okay with you? And have that expectation before you've even gotten off the call. If you've had that expectation, it no longer is an intrusive question. It's not you were calling them out of the blue and interrupting their day. It's expected at that point because you've had that conversation. You've set that precedent within your first conversation. So just make sure you're not relying on your memory. Use your CRM software and all the technology at your disposal for making your follow-ups as strategic and as impactful as possible. And then, just schedule those reminders, go through the cycle, and remember that you're going to have to do anywhere between 9 to maybe even 20 follow-ups before you're going to land a sale because it does take that many touch points depending on your product or service.
Yeah. And I know that we're giving you a framework for the follow ups. And what it's really trying to tell you is make sure that we are following up and that we're consistent with the way that we're following up because we want to show that consistency and reliability again to that client that we're there to serve them. And you have to use your intuition here a little bit too to decide when's the right follow-up time for me with that client. Again, listen to the client to see, okay, where are they at? How much of a push do they need? What type of information can I still deliver them in a timely manner for that conversation to still go, be memorable and just maintain that conversation. Again, it's maintaining that timeline to make sure that we don't lose the person, but it's just enough to maintain that person and to just guide them into that process. Remember, we're nurturing this relationship into that close.
Exactly. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, okay, well, what do I say? Like, the follow-ups are hard and I don't know what to say. What is that conversation going to look like for me as a new up and coming sales rep making my first follow-up? So Damon, can you tell us a little bit more about how those follow-ups look and what it would look like practically?
For sure. I mean, knowing what to say is important. And one of the biggest mistakes in the follow-up is just the one where it just says, hey, I'm just checking in. Because right away, people get immune to seeing that statement over and over again. And that's one that is typically used by a lot of sales reps, especially if they don't know what to say or how to add that value to somebody. And so we got to remember, like, our whole objective is to keep adding value to show them a representation of us. And we want to show them that, hey, we're a valuable asset to you, because again, it's that investment into me that they're making, into getting that product or service, to make sure that there's somebody behind the product or service that's going to be able to service them. So instead of saying, hey, I'm just checking in, you can reference the previous conversation. I'll give you an example. Hi, John. Last time we spoke, you mentioned delivery delays were affecting your inventory flow. I wanted to follow up and see if you had any questions about the solution that we had discussed. So in that statement, what I'm trying to do is really show somebody that I actually, took the time to listen and to make the proper notes to what the person actually said. And so each time I'm able to add just that little piece of value, so I could just share that, whether it's a quick insight, mention a case example, highlight a relevant benefit, or even provide a new place or a new piece of information. So follow-ups are always meant to move that conversation forward and not to restart it from a point where, again, we're going to have a difficult time trying to ramp it back up. Instead, continue off. So we see this even when reps are being passed off or customers are being passed off, prospects are being passed off from one person to another salesperson. And the biggest mistake sometimes that happens is that new rep will take it back to the beginning instead of continuing that conversation from where it was. And so taking that time to just kind of learn what that previous conversation was and being specific about the examples are really going to help push you towards keeping that conversation going and even back to the close.
Yeah. And the better your understanding, your research, your note-taking, all of the conversations that you've had up until this point, the better grasp of that information well that you have, the better you'll be able to move into the conversations. And this is where the differentiator between persistent versus pushy comes into play. And this is a big thing when it comes to sales, because persistence wins sales, pushy doesn't. Persistence tends to be that calm, that confident, knows what they're doing persona, the sales rep who walks into the room and everybody is just captivated by them. Pushy, it tends to feel really desperate, a little bit kind of slimy. It's not that good feeling when you're in sales. So if you're doing sales, if you're doing the follow-ups and you're having that slimy feeling or you don't feel good about the way you're doing it, I would recommend look at how you're formatting your follow-up and how you're speaking, because it could be that you're unintentionally coming off as pushy versus persistent. Now, what does that look like to be a persistent rep? If you want to be a sales rep who capitalizes in persistence, you need to be able to respect those timelines, have an understanding of what your customer needs and respect that. Make sure you're keeping it professional. Under no circumstances do you let that professionality slip, and keep that tone relaxed, calm, structured, confident, and just focus on solving their problems. At the end of the day, that's all sales reps are doing, is solving problems. So if that is your number one key focus in that call, you're on the right track. As long as it's problem-solving focus, you're in the right direction. Now, when it comes to pushy reps, though, you're going to see the contrast of their character traits and what a pushy rep looks like. But this is where you're going to see a lot of those rush decisions, those sales reps who are really chasing their customers to be like, so are you going to make that decision today? Are you going to buy today? Or can we sign that contract right now? You can see it. You can feel it. And they create this pressure, and they just sound impatient when they're on the phone. And it's more about hitting their sales quota than it is about hitting the service need for the customer.
And it's that tonality. And I think tonality comes from, again, are you going to have compassion or empathy towards the person? Or are you going to come at them where you've listened to that previous conversation and you know where you kind of internally feel where that person is at, so you could, again, nurture them. Again, nurturing is a key word here. Is how do you nurture them into that next step? How do you make them feel comfortable without being over pushy or, having kind of like that sales tone when it comes to those conversations? So again, does it sound like a conversation? Does it sound friendly? Again, depending on the product or service that you're selling, make it proportionate to that. Again, add the value statements in there where they're clear and concise, and you're not, sometimes what I notice with sales reps too is the ones that are typically inexperienced are just putting anything and everything into that email or anything and everything into that conversation where, they're not really continuing off from the previous conversation, and they're just having to think like they have to do too much. And so when we're able to slow that down and then again, come at it from a place of just, simplicity, it just makes it easier for the customer too.
Yeah, exactly. Like there is a huge difference in like the confidence level of somebody saying like, hi, Damon, I'm just calling to follow up to see if you've made a decision since we spoke last time, versus, hey, Damon, I'm just calling to reconnect as we discussed during our last phone conversation. Are there any questions based off of the information that we discussed last time that I could answer for you today? Huge difference in how that conversation, that perception goes about.
Yeah. Or, if someone told you to call back in, 1 week or 3 weeks or whatever that time frame may be, it's a quick conversation just to say, hey, you had mentioned for me to call you back at this time. And then again, mention 1 or 2 points that you want to mention to get them to be like, okay, to get that response and see where you left off. Mm-hmm. Right. So make it a continuation where whenever we put those tidbits into the conversation from the previous conversation, the customer gets more familiar with you as well. And especially when you use their words back at them, now they could kind of nod and say, okay, yeah, I did say that. And sometimes people don't remember all the time what they had said in the previous conversation. But when you can repeat their words back to them, they know, okay, yeah, that's something I would have said. And yeah, okay, yeah, if I said that, I'm more likely to engage in this conversation going forward.
Exactly. And it will also give you that ammunition that if there are staffing changes, if somebody leaves, you'll be able to refer back to all of your notes and everything that you have from those conversations, from those email threads, and use that to build that new relationship. So just as a little extra bonus tip there is having proper record keeping is going to keep transition periods a lot shorter. And then, yeah, it really just comes down to your language matters. What you say to your customer and to your prospects really does matter. That tone matters, and how you control your demeanor and your professionalism matters.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that actually wraps up our episode, Gail, pretty quick. So that's episode 33, which is mastering the phone sales and the follow-up. So today we covered a couple topics. One was why the follow-up is where the deals are won. And we talked about the mindset requirement that's required for the follow-up, how often to follow up, what to say during the follow-ups, and how to stay persistent without being too pushy, which is a key one. So remember, the fortune is actually in the follow-up. Most sales reps quit way too early. Not you though, but if you stay consistent, structured, and confident, you will close more deals. So use your CRM, schedule your reminders, and add value every single time you communicate. And we'll see you in the next episode of Mastering Phone Sales. So until then, stay consistent, stay confident, and keep closing. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.